Have you ever gotten stuck on questions that seem designed to frustrate? Like, how tall is too tall to be considered short? Or when does a cluster of cells become a person? These aren't just gaps in information. The concepts themselves are slippery. It's a gray area where simple black and white thinking falls short. So, what do you do with an answer you're unsure of? Is it simply wrong, or is there something more to it? Instead of dismissing these confusing areas, perhaps we should remain curious. This sense of fuzziness becomes apparent when even seemingly clear-cut concepts break down. Take a child who's clearly overweight. We generally have an idea of what obese looks like, but what about less obvious cases? Suddenly the term becomes vague, with no single definitive test. What does it even mean to be obese when BMI charts don't account for muscle mass? It shows how quickly we move from simple understanding to complex debate, with people trying to fit their experiences into predetermined categories rather than seeking genuine understanding. We try to label subjective experience and then argue about it as if it were entirely objective. These fuzzy areas are important because they reveal the limits of our knowledge. It's not just a matter of ignorance. Some things are inherently difficult to define precisely. The decapitation paradox, for example, illustrates how even agreeing on definitions doesn't always lead to clarity. It forces us to confront the fact that some concepts resist neat categorization. It's like trying to fit a fluid world into rigid boxes, a fundamental aspect of existence. The goal shouldn't always be finding a definitive answer, but rather the process of inquiry and the understanding it brings. Even something like the transition from day to night becomes complex upon closer examination. Where exactly is the dividing line? Is twilight part of day or night? Defining these boundaries often leads to further ambiguities, but this fuzziness isn't necessarily negative. It doesn't inherently hinder communication. It highlights the limitations of precision and allows for flexibility. Like learning a musical instrument, you start with basic chords, then move on to inversions, and eventually learn to express yourself intuitively. Perhaps conversation can be similar. By accepting these limitations, we can use them creatively. However, engaging with abstract thinking can be challenging. Some prefer clear-cut categories for straightforward discussion. Borderline cases add complexity for those seeking direct answers. Consider a work contract, where complex issues are often simplified through jargon. Exploring beyond these simplified systems can be seen as impractical, highlighting our attachment to single perspectives. That in-between area, where the answer is both yes and no, seems crucial to understanding. This space between definitions helps us reconsider vagueness. We often assume a vague person is simply unable to be clear. But when that same person achieves something remarkable, we often see it as a kind of irony, prompting us to reconsider our perspective. It's like a travel agent saying, "France is a hexagon." We don't interpret it as a geometric error. We understand the intended meaning. This flexibility allows language to convey core ideas. Vague statements, when used purposefully, can be powerful. We also blur the lines between what should and could happen, especially with abstract concepts. We see debates about the definitions of terms like woman or seaworthy, where valid opinions clash due to a lack of objective criteria. Perhaps embracing a degree of agnosticism, accepting uncertainty, is a more productive approach. Human interactions are similar. We gradually develop deeper understanding. These nuances aren't mistakes. They're part of the process of human expression. These debates often get bogged down in semantic arguments, when the real issue is a clash of belief systems. It's not about right or wrong, but about differing perspectives. This can become problematic when belief becomes detached from reason, leading to overconfidence and a rejection of anything that challenges our understanding. This hinders intellectual growth. Considering the relationship between vagueness and paradoxes can be insightful. A basic truth, taken to an extreme, can become false. Paradoxes are challenging because they highlight our difficulty in simplifying complex realities. Dissatisfaction with societal norms isn't necessarily cynicism. It can stem from recognizing untapped potential due to limited perspectives. Even the pursuit of precision acknowledges the existence of gaps and ambiguities. Those who value precision, like epistemologists, recognize that ignorance contributes to vagueness. It's like an accountant trying to quantify everything, while life unfolds beyond those confines. The unknowns remain because knowing is not always a complete description. Sometimes understanding occurs without words. While we may seek to impose boundaries, they can become limiting when reality doesn't conform. The attempt to reduce the world to data can reinforce a fear of abstraction. Describing the perfect shade of blue numerically will always fall short. Strict logic has limitations. It can't fully grasp what lies outside its framework. These discussions then turn to context and usage, suggesting that language may only point to the edges of deeper understanding. Understanding is more holistic than simply knowing. It depends on the observer. Abstract perspectives are valuable. Without categories, we couldn't process information. A contextualist approach, which doesn't adhere rigidly to fixed ideas, can allow for nuanced responses in human interaction. Understanding depends on context, like how behavior changes from a party to a scholarly discussion. Understanding isn't a fixed value, but about how an idea expresses intent. How else does art transcend cultural boundaries without literal translation? Some interpretations suggest vagueness represents incompleteness. Meaning is an evolving process rather than a fixed point. The supervaluationist approach suggests truth exists under all possible interpretations, implying vagueness is simply indecision. While language requires completion, that completion is often temporary. Meaning becomes static without the dynamism of ongoing interaction. It's about what the speaker intends, not just the definitions of words. It's about how we experience language, not just its rules. The irony is that this entire discussion about abstraction is itself inherently vague, demonstrating how fundamental the concept is to human experience. It helps us navigate situations where opposing views coexist. Perhaps understanding isn't about having all the answers, but about a process of inquiry that reveals new perspectives. Does meaning simply emerge? Perhaps life and meaning are found in the shared journey through uncertainty, rather than the pursuit of rigid answers.